Hello. Today I want to share how I actually started my sewing business back in 2004. Because if you know me at all, I tend to talk about the part where I have so much work to do and I get torn apart by, client demands that I get myself into burnout and that whole story of turning this around to then becoming a coach. But the part that I never really talk about is how I got started. It always sounds like, yeah, so I went out to make flamenco dresses and slowly the orders kept coming in and then all of a sudden I built myself this hamster wheel. That's usually the story I tell. But I want to share today what actually happened before that. So when I first had the idea and it came out of a holiday in Granada where I thought, boy, I'd love to live here. How could I pull this off? And when I had the idea, I took almost 2 years to plan my exit. I studied Spanish. I took classes with a tailor in London, so my technical sewing skills would be up to scratch. And I basically organized my exit. And in February 2004, I made the cut. I went to resign from my job and packed up and moved to Granada. Now, one thing to mention there, when I resigned, my bosses, lovely bosses at a bank in London, offered me a remote contract to keep working for the bank for another 9 months, which, just as well, because when I first started, what happened was nothing. I went to every single flamenco dance school that had ever existed in the Yellow Pages, and I knocked on their door and I offered my services as a dressmaker, and the reaction was always the same. It was like, oh no, we're fine. We don't need any. Others would say, oh, okay, yeah, leave your number here. When it comes to the year-end performance, we always look for a dressmaker who's really good but doesn't really charge anything because, money is short. So basically, if you're prepared to work for free, then we want you. And I went to the school that I had been a student at and thought, well, it's going to be easier there because I already know them. And so I walked in, offered my, to make flamenco like practice skirts. And the guy said, well, forget about that. Like, no, you're never going to pull this off. Forget about the idea. You better go home and don't mess with things you can't, no. And so yeah, basically it just kept going like that. And I put out flyers, the ones where you can pull off the numbers. And I got exactly 0 calls, literally nothing. And yeah, I was like, I don't know, maybe what I have in mind is something that people don't want. It's just maybe, I don't know, maybe there's no demand for it at all because I really didn't know anymore what else to do. And it was before social media too. But so one day I talked to a Japanese friend of mine and she says, oh, actually, I've got this friend who's got a shop where they sell flamenco related stuff. You could, and she introduced us, and that woman ordered a couple of practice skirts, like 4 or something, 2 or 4, can't remember. But basically they were, like white skirts with ruffles at the bottom. And she gave me the fabric and she paid me 19 euros a piece. The trouble was with my domestic machines and me starting out, they took me 4 hours to make. So there I was, from the IT salary to making 5 euros an hour skirts after 1 year. I thought, well, this isn't exactly what I had in mind. But I was also too stubborn to come back home, come back to London with my, tail between my legs to admit failure. So I wasn't quite ready for that. And about 3 months later, a friend of mine said, oh, I'm taking dance classes in this school. Come along and watch me dance. And I thought, well, I might as well, whatever. I might as well take my leaflet and see and talk to the owner. And the guy goes, oh, so you're sewing. Oh, can you? And he gave me a couple of alterations. And a couple of weeks later, he said, why could you? I don't know. I know it's a lot to ask and I know it's short notice, but could you make 12 outfits for this group of dancers for their end of year performance in 3 weeks? And I'm like, yep, Yep. And I walked out, I'm like, oh God, I don't know what I've got myself into, because I literally I'd never made 12 dresses. I had no idea whether I'd be able to pull this off. But I did know, this is one opportunity after over a year of hustling. And if I don't take it, who knows if there will ever be another one. So I worked my butt off, and I worked through the last night, and I finished the last dress like literally 20 minutes before the curtain went up. And I remember being in the theater and, and helping them dress, and, they're finally ready to go out on stage. And so I'm sitting in my seat in the audience, the lights go out, the curtains go up, and I'm like snoring all the way through. Like, I don't know whether I was snoring, but I was sleeping. I didn't ever see I didn't even see them come out. I saw the performance on video on YouTube 2 years later. And after that, it was when the same dancers would ring again or would pass on my number, and things would start to pick up momentum then. But really, if you are starting out with your business and you have that sensation that you're running your head against the wall, my biggest lessons were, boy, did this take much longer than I thought. I felt a lot less support than I ever expected. And also what I initially set out wasn't like really what I was doing in the end. So it isn't a straight path either. But the good news about that is, looking back, it's funny to remember how there was the sensation that there wasn't a market for, like, nobody seemed to want what I had to offer. Whereas a few years later, the biggest challenge was to keep on top of all the orders. So, and it is at the beginning, when nobody knows you, when you haven't got a portfolio or website or client testimonials, it's hard. It's hard. You need to find that one entry into, to get you those first initial clients or orders or whatever it is you're selling. So basically, but looking back, if you ask me now, well, boy, that sounds pretty awful. Would you do it again? Boy, yes. It was like the biggest crash course in personal growth I've ever gone through. And yes, it was worth every second of it. And so it's just, remember, if you are in the beginning and it feels hard, it feels like you're pushing this big boulder up a hill, everybody goes through that. And it's not an indication of whether your business has a chance of success and how well you're doing. The only thing that is an indication of whether or not you have a chance of making it work is whether you allow the impatience and discouragement to stop you from taking the next step. That's the only thing that can get in the way. So I hope that helps. And let me know your experience. I'd love to hear.